Hello, filter-free America listeners. Welcome back to the Filter-Free America podcast. I will tell you up front, this episode was created today, obviously, but today is September 11th, 2019. This is basically an episode kind of dedicated to the events of September 11th. There's not going to be any interview in this episode. There's not going to be a lot of humor in it, if any at all. Okay. I do want to say up front as a disclaimer to anyone who is overly offended or offended in any kind of way or upset or angered or frustrated by the talk of anyone who dares to question the official story of the events of 9/11, then this probably isn't an episode that you're going to want to listen to. That said, I hope you listen to this episode. If you're one of those people who shake their heads, mock, insult anyone who dares question the official narrative of the events on 9/11, I hope you listen to this episode. I hope you do. In this episode, I want to basically do two things with it. Most importantly, I want to use my platform, the Filter Free America podcast, to share a press conference that was held this morning by members of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. If you're a regular listener, you've probably heard me refer to them more than once. And I'll set up that press conference. I'll give you kind of an idea going into it, what you're about to hear and who you're about to hear from. But I'll do that kind of here shortly. But also, I wanted just to talk a little bit about my personal views on 9/11. I get a lot of letters or emails, I guess, from you guys that are listeners, and I've mentioned, my position. It's not like I hide from it or anything like that. I'm pretty open and honest about it. I've been talking about it for many, many years, ever since I've been in podcasting and when I was on radio. But just as kind of a refresher and where I'm at now and things I think that are important related to 9/11 and things that I wish people would look into. And I guess just kind of update you on where my head is at as far as 9/11 goes. Everybody tells their where were they at stories on 9/11. I'll give you mine. 9/11 happened right after I moved to Minnesota. I was living in a rented room in a house in Hopkins, Minnesota. I had worked late the evening before and was honestly asleep when 9/11 happened, literally asleep. My first memory was the lady who I rented the room from, a very nice lady whose name I can't remember. I heard her yelling downstairs to where my room was at, beyond my closed and locked door, telling me to wake up, telling me to get up. There's something going on. I was hearing bits and pieces as you come out of sleep. Something about a plane hitting a building. And that was my first glimpse into to what was going on. I woke up, went upstairs, joined her in kind of the common area, living room area there, and started to absorb all the news reports from all the different media outlets that we had access to, describing what was going on and what have you. I had slept through, I believe, both plane impacts, so I didn't get to see either one of those happen live. But I did wake up and was aware before the building collapses happened. So that was basically where I kind of, started viewing the events live, was post-plane impact, pre collapses. And as a person now who does not believe the official narrative, I'll tell you right now that at that time and for many years afterwards, I believed the official story. Right? You'll hear a lot of people when you talk about 9/11, and they'll say things like, "Oh, I knew it right away. As soon as I saw it, I knew this was some bullshit." I didn't have that point of view. I guess my nose was wide open for the narrative that was being pushed. And for any of you who were not alive or not of age to remember that, definitely go back and look at old news reports. From the very beginning, the narrative, the official narrative that we're all supposed to believe today was being pushed. In retrospect, it's strange how clear and how obvious it was that they were pushing it. But like I said, I didn't catch on. I didn't have doubts, right? I was scared. I was confused. I'm sure many feelings, I was having many feelings that many of you were having, right? Or at least the people who, aren't claiming to have had it figured out from day one. I was angered. It was different. It was, to say it was surreal is an understatement. You can look back in history and see things like wars and attacks, be it Pearl Harbor or whatever. But when you look back on history, it's a detachment, no matter how hard you try. When you look back at something you didn't experience and try to learn from it, it's a definite detachment. But when you live through it, when you watch it, when it unfolds in front of your eyes, it's very different. At least it was for me. I don't know. I try not to speak for everybody. I try to just speak for myself here. But yeah. So that was kind of how my day started out. I had to work that day. I was working at a restaurant, working in the kitchen, cooking in a restaurant. It was a kind of a bar place. The news was going, all day. Every channel had coverage going on. The collapses happened, before I went to work. I went to work, and I just went to work just almost in a daze. The place I worked at obviously didn't close. It was a bar. They probably did better business that day. But I went to work kind of in a daze. Just, I don't really know how to explain it. It feels like, to me, it just felt like I was in a different world from that point on. I was in a whole different world. I remember going to work and again, working in kind of a bar restaurant type thing and being almost confused by so many of the people there who, were pounding drinks, and there was, yes, people were watching the news. Yes, people were talking about it, but there wasn't like an anger, not like an obvious anger. Like everybody was mad, but everybody was just kind of, God, I don't know how to describe it. Almost like an agreeance. Like, yep, that happened. And they're telling us why it happened and how it happened. And that's why it is. And again, I fell along with it, right? I completely, I didn't doubt the story, what I was being told, and I started hearing about Osama bin Laden. I started hearing about terrorist attacks, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And it was, I don't know. It was a, and it seems cliche to say, but it's absolutely true. I mean, at that age of, of being a human of that age and experience that, it truly is a day you'll never forget. Speed the story up, from September 11th 2001 up until mid 2007, 2008, I was fully vested in the official narrative. I was. More so, I was one of those people that, when the rumbling started happening, there was doubts almost immediately by some people within the first 2 to 3 years. Even members of surviving members of people who died on 9/11, they were having questions. That stuff was starting to bubble up. I didn't follow it near as closely as I did, do now, and a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, I had learned later. But when people started questioning and saying things like it was, using terms like false flags and the government was involved and all that, I'll be very honest with you. I was one of those people that called those people crazy, that mocked them, that, thought that was just ridiculous. Why would our country have anything to do with this? Why would they want anything like this to happen? Why would they take part in this? Why would, any of that stuff? It was terrorists. It was these Muslim terrorists from another country that just don't like us here because of our freedoms. The whole cliche thing. That was my point of view. I would aggressively combat, verbally, anyone who dared question the official story. How that started to change was, it's on social media at the time. And, the conversations were happening there as well, too. This was 2007 for me. And I've mentioned him before in a past episode when talking about conspiracy topics. And I feel so bad that I don't know his name or remember his name or have contact with him now. But I started getting into very deep conversations with this black dude who I'd met on social media. It's the only way I knew him. I remember he lived in Texas. I remember that. But we used to talk and go back and forth all the time when he was trying to convince me that the official story is not true. And he was super intelligent. He was, very, very well read, very, very educated. And he would, offer up, evidence of certain aspects or certain parts of it. And I would try to challenge those, and I would try to combat his knowledge and debunk it. And I remember we used to go for months, back and forth on some things. And slowly but surely, I didn't admit it to him right away, but slowly but surely, I started to think that maybe I wasn't completely right. I didn't want to say it immediately. I didn't want to verbalize it to him or to anyone else, but I started having doubts about what I thought was true. He, relied a lot on logic and a scientific take on the events that happened that day. And that's what reached me first. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not an architect. I'm not super highly educated in any kind of way. I've made that a pretty clear record. But what he was saying to me wasn't a complex thing to understand. Understanding the basics of motion and scientific principles involved with, simple ideas like gravity and so forth. That was what started to reach me. He was trying to explain to me things that were that went against the official story based on scientific principle. And some of the suggestions that he was making were ones that I couldn't, debunk. So it was about that time into 2007, 2008 that I was like, you know what? I think I'm wrong. I think that my view that the official 9/11 story provided by the 9/11 Commission report is wrong. And I don't know if anyone else has that. That's a very humbling moment, because to admit that, to think that, you have to question your entire worldview, right? If you come from a position that I was in, where I wouldn't say I was extremely, USA, everything USA, red, white, and blue, everything's perfect USA. But I was still ignorant to the realities of what our country could do or has done historically in the past. And this 9/11 thing, and then my change of view, was kind of a catalyst for changing my whole worldview. And when it happened, like I said, it was humbling, man. To look back on your life for however many, I was, 20, whatever. And I had to question everything in my, my mature mind, my views of government, world events, international affairs, loyalties, patriotism, all that stuff. It all kind of came crumbling down. I'm not saying I hate this country, and that's often a point of confusion when people, start talking about stuff like this. Oh, you hate the country. I don't. I love the country. I love the country, and I love the people in it. Not a fan of the government at all. Don't trust the government at all. But that's where I'm at now. But that transition, man, that was hard. That was really, really hard. Because to make that transition, you've got to admit to yourself that you were fooled. That you were so passionate and so strongly defending your country from these accusations that they could, in some kind of way, be involved with or have allowed something like this to happen. It's very hard to do. Not only is it hard to do, it's scary. Right? You go back through everything you've ever taught, everything you ever learned in school, from elementary level, social studies and things like that, and standing up and saying the pledge to the flag, and learning about, this homogenized, this refined history version that you were taught from an early age. And realizing that if you question the 9/11 story, you have to question all of that. You can't trust, in my case, decades of experience in life, in learning, in school, and education. That's when we talk about, why a lot of people who have questions about 9/11, when we talk to each other, and we wonder why, people can't see what we feel are obvious points of question within the official story. A lot of people just, these people are dumb. They don't get it, whatever. I don't feel that way. I might have felt that way for a while in the beginning of my transition of views. But over time, I've kind of got to this point where I think that there's probably a lot of people out there who question the official 9/11 story, but who are scared to verbalize it, who are in a point of transition or have changed their mind and have transitioned to now question the story. But the idea of that, the idea of throwing out their worldview is terrifying. I don't think that, because I was able to do that and deal with it, I don't think that makes me any better or any less than anyone else. But not everyone's the same, and not everyone can handle what is a shock to your system, that making that turn of thought happen. Oftentimes, and when I make a post on Facebook related to 9/11, we had some just, not too long ago, a couple days ago. And I always try to get fellow truthers, if you will, who become aggressive and insulting to people who believe the official story and who don't want to question it. I'll always try to get them to rein back their aggression and their anger, and not being insulting, and not call people stupid or ignorant or uninformed, any of that stuff, because I understand and appreciate how hard it is to even think of this, of the idea of this country, this group that you're a part of, being involved in any level to causing or let happen or turning a blind eye to what happened on 9/11. So if you're a truther, if you're a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, please take that into consideration when you're out preaching the gospel of 9/11 truth. Number one, it's counterproductive. Don't, if you, somebody who is still clinging to the official story and believes it word for word and has no doubts whatsoever, you've got to appreciate what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to destroy their worldview and throw it out the window for a minute. And that doesn't happen in just one or two exchanges in some Facebook comments, or you play in some videos or something. It doesn't happen like that. They could have all the evidence in the world piled up right in front of them, but there's still a barrier of fear of what they need to admit to, and how much they have to humble themselves, and how much they have to recognize how incorrect they were by considering any of this stuff. Just considering it is detrimental to the mind, to the psyche, to the soul of a human being. I mean, we oftentimes don't want to admit that we're these tribal beings, but we are, right? I talk about that a lot on the podcast. We're all tribal to one degree or another. being patriotic, being an American is a form of tribalism. And some of these people who cling to that, who's built their life around it, serve the country under an idea of what this country is, that if you were to question the official 9/11 story, throws it all out the window. You've got to appreciate that, man. You gotta be, even if they're insulting you, if you're talking with in person, or you're talking via social media or whatever, they call you a crazy tinfoil conspiracy theorist. Don't take that shit personally. Okay? I know it bothers you. It bothers me too, right? But again, understand what you're asking that person to do. All right? It's a life-altering moment. And they can't do it right there. And they may not do it next week, and they may not do it next month. It could be years. It took me years. It took me essentially 7 years. I had 7 years to process, to look at things and to read and to understand and be told something and debate and bicker and go back and forth. I had 7 years to evolve my thinking or change my point of view, however you want to say it. And I did the same things. I was insulting. I apologize to anyone who I ever insulted, who tried to, to get me to look at something, to get me to question something in regards to 9/11. For that 7 years, I apologize. I hope many of you find a way to hear this, especially the dude whose name I can't remember in Texas. I feel so bad about that. He spent so much time with me. He was polite. He was never angry. He was never aggressive. God, if I wish I could remember your name. So yeah, I guess be nice. Talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. But do so with some tact. Don't make some kind of post on Facebook. Hey dummies, you dummies, you're still following the official 9/11 narrative of what happened. You're so dumb. You're not gonna get anybody on your side doing that for any kind of reason. It's not gonna fix. It's not gonna help them come to your side by doing that. Be patient. One of the things I want to address on the other side of 9/11 conspiracy theorists or what have you. There's a huge group of you guys who are pushing some bullshit. Okay? There's a large group of you guys and gals who take a thimble amount of truth and fact, and either intentionally or because of lack of thought and thorough research and reading and understanding, you go out and you question the official narrative in the most ridiculous ways possible. Okay? Understand the difference between talking in fact and speculation. Okay? When I talk about 9/11, when I talk to somebody who either comes to me and says, hey, I want to know more about what you think about 9/11, I try to stick mainly with the facts and how the official narrative story conflicts with science and things that are accepted as legitimate science or legitimate fact. I try to stay there. If I ever progress in a conversation to points of who did it or why they did it or how they did it, I'm very clear in letting that person know, hey, this is where fact stops, and this is where my speculation begins. All right? I'm not going to debate things like, oh, it was some holograms, it was laser beams, it was this, that, and everything. I'm not going to debate that with you guys. I don't believe that. But I'm not here to debate that. Okay? But many of you are doing a very huge disservice to the people trying to get others to consider the idea that at the very, very least, we were not told 100% of the story. Okay? This kind of goes back to what I was saying before, right? You can't expect people to have a change of mind and worldview instantly on something like this. Even more so, you can't expect them to consider the idea when you dump all these, I want to say ridiculous because to me they are ridiculous, but I don't want to do the same thing to and insult your point of view. But you can't dump all this crap in these people's laps and expect them not to freak the fuck out. Okay? If you want to believe that the planes never existed and they were fucking holograms going through buildings, fucking go for it. Okay? But until you can fucking prove that, right? Until you have some kind of scientific principle or some verified fucking evidence, quit shoving that shit in the face of people who aren't ready to question the story yet. You're making it fucking harder and harder for legitimate groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, similar groups, to get anybody to even consider the idea of it because you've got it so fucking lizard people deep level bullshit that you're muddied the waters. I tell people we need to look at 9/11 like any other crime, like any other law enforcement agency would do a crime, would investigate a crime, okay? When a law enforcement agency gets involved, the first thing they need to do is determine if a crime happened. Well, we know a crime happened, okay? What's the next step? They want to determine how that crime happened, right? They don't go, oh, there's a crime. Fucking throwing suspects and pulling names out of the air and all that stuff. They don't do that. If it's a breaking and entering type robbery thing, they want to know how the person got into the building. They investigate it. They determine how a crime happened. Look for evidence and go from there. You can't dump a bunch of shit on people who are either in the process of transitioning their view on this or still clinging to the official story and expect them to take you seriously. Start with the science. In my view, that is the best possible way to talk to someone, to get someone to even consider the idea that the official story is bullshit. World accepted scientific principles about laws of motion and gravity are, you can't argue those away, okay? Because they exist, right? Start there. The building collapses could not have happened as we were told they happened by just planes crashing into them. It's impossible for it to happen. That's scientifically impossible for it to happen. So the conversation needs to start there. I don't give a fuck who did it. I don't care if it was Bush, if it was the government or some foreign power that, collaborated with whoever. I don't care about any of that. What I want people to understand is the official story of how those buildings came down, talking about Tower 1, 2, and 7, couldn't happen that way. Let's get everybody to understand that first. Let's start there. Start there. A spoonful of truth. Then once we're all on the same page with that, then we can dive into this motherfucker and really investigate it the way it needs to be done. But to do that, to get to that point, we need to have a consensus. We need to have a majority of people demanding a new independent investigation into the events of 9/11. And fucking laser beams and holograms is not going to get us there. I might be wrong. Maybe it was fucking laser beams and fucking holograms. Maybe it was. Okay? But we'll get to that point eventually. And the people who try to debunk you and the people who call you crazy tinfoil folks, they are right about some things. Too many of you will take any fucking goddamn video that you find on YouTube or shared on 4chan and swear to God that that's the truth and that's fucking proof. Remember that goddamn video? God, this pissed me off so much. There for a while, and I don't see it so much now, but over the last 5 years, I remember it coming up, and I've had to fucking talk to people about it constantly. There was a video of World Trade Center 7 coming down, and then there were special effects explosions put on there. I'm not talking about the little jets of material coming out that was legitimate, but somebody went in and edited a video and put like Hollywood explosion special effects on top of a literal video, of an actual video. And people were sharing that like, look, you see the explosions right there. No, dummy. It's a fake fucking video. If you want to understand something, you're not going to understand the scope of something like this in a 15 to 20 minute fucking video. Okay? Quit confirming your own views. Question your own views. What I try to do, and what I've always done since transitioning my view on 9/11, is I try to poke holes in everything that I think is true. I try to debunk myself. Furthermore, if I believe what something is told to me, let's use architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, for instance, okay? If they tell me that this is a scientific principle that prevents the official narrative from being true, I don't just accept that, right? I'll find a book or Google search a resource that talks about that scientific principle and try to understand it more independently so I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm still not an expert. By far, not a brilliant mind in any kind of way. But before I want to present something and be confident in my words, I fucking educate myself. And being educated is not just taking a fucking video and co-signing it for no fucking reason. Oh, that sounds good. That sounds right. Yeah, sure, why not? You said a bunch of fucking $5 words that I don't really know. So I'm gonna push this story. Don't do that. Question yourself. Question your own thinking. Refine your point of view. If a building can't fall at free fall speed, understand why it can't fall at free fall speed. Understand Newton's rules of motion. They're very simple junior high level principles. But if you don't understand them and how they work, you're not doing the cause any good. And again, about the fucking laser beams, goddamn holograms, man. If you can't prove that, if you can't see it, right? You can have it in the pile of possibilities, but don't go pushing that shit. You're making it harder. You're making it harder on everyone else because we have to combat that shit. Keep it fucking simple. Simple scientific principles. Confirmed, undeniable facts. Focus on that. Because again, those debunkers are right. There are people out there who have made this an industry. Who've made conspiracies of all sorts a point of profit. They're not in it because they give a fuck. They're in it to profit off of ignorance. Also, please consider this, that if in fact a government, a group, a cabal, whatever fucking words you want to use for a group of people who would have both the means and the capacity and the abilities to be a part of this, to allow something like this to happen, to create this, please fucking understand that they're going to want to put disinformation out there to muddy the waters exactly the way that it's being muddied right now by the things that I'm talking about. That is the perfect camouflage. That if you want to get off into that world of there's some kind of group, some kind of illicit group, be it in the government or whatever out, or an outside government or a shadow government, anything like that, please understand that they're going to try to put some bullshit out there to cause this kind of confusion. And you're fucking falling for it. You're doing what you want them to do. You're creating a fucking confusion of ideas that makes the group of people that we need to bring over to look at the legitimate shit that are making them fucking turn their nose up and look the other way because it's too much. Many of you are being pawned. Many of you on the conspiracy side of things, you guys are being fucking pawned. You are tools for the people that you claim to be wanting to expose. Keep it fucking simple. Let's determine that the official narrative is wrong. From there, determine what did actually happen. As far as the science and the mechanics of the collapses in whatever. Let's get there and then move to the next level. Step by step. Respectful conversations with people who don't share your view. Not aggression. Understand that you're dealing with human beings who many of whom aren't prepared to make the mental leap required that's going to cause them to throw everything that they believe in, they care about, that they've served in the military for in many cases, to throw it all out the fucking window. And you calling them fucking sheep, Calling them sheeple. It's not going to fucking help. People who don't have a question about the official 9/11 story. Are you still with me? Are you still there? All right, let me set up the what you're about to hear. Today, again, September 11th, 2019, this morning, a group of individuals who are part of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth had a press conference discussing their activities to date and their demands for a new investigation and the grounds on which they're making that demand. They released this in video form. You can find it on the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth YouTube channel. They also have a Facebook page. And this is one of the very few sources I have a confidence in as far as their research work that they're doing to, I guess, expose the truth of 9/11. Verifiable experts, okay? People whose names you can look up, search them, and find their education, their background, their work history, their affiliations. People you can meet, people who have offices. You're going to hear a few different people. I think the first gentleman, I believe his name is Chris Joya. He is a fire commissioner. He is a former fire chief. He also works now. I think he also works in construction field in areas related to information that you'd want to know when talking about architecture collapses and things of that nature, and construction in general. He'll be one of the first people that will speak. You'll also hear from a father of a victim who died during 9/11. Once you hear him, remember his. I don't have his name written down right in front of me. I apologize. But you can find him giving larger, I guess, speeches or press conferences related to the death of his son, who died in one of the towers on 9/11, and giving some incredible details that, of course, your major mainstream media outlets have not shared with you. After him, the head of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Richard Gage, he will be speaking and not giving a full description of his position and why he has it and the research that they've done, but some very specific points in regards to why you need to question the official story and the work that they're doing in current lawsuits that are currently in the courts right now. Right? Actual courts, actual lawsuits being filed in regards to 9/11. So you'll get that from him. And there's also a former law enforcement official. Actually, I think he's still active, some capacity, but 23 years in law enforcement, also part of this group. It's, about 50 minutes in total. But please listen to every single word of it, especially if you're new to this or you're new to the idea of this, or you're one of those people that absolutely swears up and down that there's no way that this could be anything other than the official story. Please listen to this. But don't listen to it and just turn a switch in your head and automatically start believing it. Take some notes. Look up something. If they give you something that they're presenting as a fact, try to confirm it. Google who these people are. Look up their histories. Become familiar with who these people are. Take some fucking time. between television shows and sporting events and fucking whatever you do, take some time to try to understand what they're presenting to you as best you can. This is important stuff, right? Our whole world has been changed because of the events on 9/11. We have less freedom. We have less trust of each other. Hatefulness, racism has grown from this. Trillions of dollars have gone both missing in many cases or been wasted and invested in wars and things that are claimed to be needed for our security, all because of the events on 9/11. Trillions of dollars. A number you could never fathom. Your money. Not to mention, literally, millions of people have died in wars that were justified because of the events on 9/11. If you claim to be anti-war, and you claim to be pro-humanity and human beings and preserving life, but you also think the idea of a 9/11 conspiracy is ridiculous, cuckoo, tinfoil hat bullshit, fuck you. Fuck you. You're intellectually dishonest if you refuse to look into this and you have those views. As always, the Filter Free America podcast is sponsored by simplewebsite.us. Simplewebsite.us. If you're interested in building a website using the Squarespace website builder and want some help doing it, simplewebsite.us is the place you need to go. Their website builders have mastered the art of building websites using the Squarespace website builder. And they can do the job for you quickly and better than I know I could. I couldn't do it myself. I turned a job over to them, and they created the filterfreeamerica.com website. Filterfreeamerica.com. America intentionally misspelled with the letter K.com. Check out what they're doing for me. I hope you guys are still there. I didn't expect to talk this long, 54 minutes in. So, I don't know. But, again, here comes the press conference. Again, this happened this morning, 9/11, 2019. This is an up-to-date position of the work that they're doing. Please use this if you're not familiar with 9/11 conspiracy and the questions that people like me have. Please use this as a catalyst, as a jump-off point. If you want to contact me privately, if you want to have a conversation with me privately, you want to talk on the phone, you want to talk via email, you want to talk via Facebook message, I'll be more than happy to make some time to do that. All right, so you're about to hear the press conference that was held this morning. Before I enter that, I do want to point out that going into that, you will hear I think it's about 40-second little music intro that I created. And layered in that is some audio from 9/11. And very important audio that I want you to listen to, because the audio that you're about to hear is all recorded by the press and media and news who were reporting on the day of 9/11. And every voice that you hear that they're talking to is a firefighter, a first responder who responded to the World Trade Center when the attacks happened. It's very important that you pay attention to the things that they say, because I want you to compare what they say in those interviews at the moment of the attacks that happened. Some of the buildings haven't fallen yet, all that. I want you to hear what they're describing, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, okay? And then compare that to what you're going to hear within the press conference. The press conference that was held 18 years later, after a decade plus of research going into this. Research, looking at the official, 9/11 narrative. I want you to hear what the firemen were saying the day that the attacks happened. What they experienced, what they saw, what they heard. All of that is important, so listen to that, please. All right, so here we go. We're going to kick it off. This is the open to the public press conference that, of course, mainstream media mostly neglected to even acknowledge. This is a press conference by members of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And definitely think you need to hear it. Right here on Filter Free America. Let's go.
What happened?
We was in an explosion. We was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was. Definitely a secondary explosion. We was inside waiting to go upstairs. And on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. Then there was a third one, too, after that one.
So what you tell me is that there was plane or whatever hit the building and the secondary explosion?
There was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building.
People don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings can blow up. This ain't done yet.
Floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running. Just ran up. And then you just sort of this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Could not run it.
West Street. I could not run it. I jumped behind a battalion car. I hit under the car. I was waiting to die.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone. Before we get started, I would like to ask everybody to please rise and join me in a salute to the flag. Hand over heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for those who were killed on 9/11, 18 years ago today, and for the men and women serving in the armed forces who are protecting our liberty and our freedom. Please be seated. Good morning again. On behalf of Joseph Torregrossa, Chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners from Franklin Square, I'd like to welcome you. He couldn't make it today. He is ill. He's suffering from the toxins that were breathed in during the rescue and recovery efforts down at Ground Zero 18 years ago today. My name is Christopher Joya, and I'm a fire commissioner with the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District in the town of Franklin Square, New York, Nassau County, which is near the Queens border. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I have been an active volunteer firefighter with the Franklin Square and Munson Fire Department for 33 years. I am also a former EMT and an ex-chief, having served 5 years in that position. I am currently employed as a construction surveyor with Local 15 Operating Engineers, New York City. And I have worked in the heavy construction industry for the past 30 years, specializing in reinforced concrete, major foundation work, and structural steel. Today I am here to announce the launching of our Justice for 9/11 Heroes campaign, which is being spearheaded by the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District. On the morning of September 11, 2001, I was working on the Brooklyn side of the East River, just north of the Williamsburg Bridge, and had a spectacular view of Manhattan and the Twin Towers. Having been an eyewitness to the attacks that day, and from being called to duty to assist the Fire Department of New York in the following days and weeks afterwards, 9/11 has never been far from my thoughts, having been burned forever into my soul. The 9/11 Commission concluded that Osama bin Laden and a group of Islamic extremists were responsible and carried out the attacks, and that was to be the end of it. Truth be told, that is far from the end of it. The 9/11 Commission was flawed, and in the words of two of its own, the chairman and the vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, respectively, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, who stated in their book, without precedent, that they were set up to fail and were starved of funds to do a proper investigation. That's their own words. They also confirmed that they were denied access to the truth and misled by senior officials in the Pentagon and the Federal Aviation Authority, and that this obstruction and deception led them to contemplate slapping officials with criminal charges. The final report did not examine key evidence and neglected serious anomalies in the various accounts of what happened. The commissioners themselves admit their report was incomplete and flawed, and that many questions about the terror attacks remain unanswered. Nevertheless, the 9/11 Commission was swiftly closed down on August 21st, 2004. The failings of the official investigation have fueled too many half-baked conspiracy theories. Some of the 9/11 truth groups promote speculative hypotheses, ignore innocent explanations, cite non-expert sources, and jump to conclusions that are not proven by the known facts. They convert mere coincidence and circumstantial evidence into cast iron proof. This is no way to debunk the obfuscations and evasions of the 9/11 report. But even amidst the hype, some of these 9/11 groups, including architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, to name a few, raise valid and important questions that were never even considered, let alone answered, by the official investigation. The bottom line here is that the American public has not been told the complete truth about the events of that fateful autumn morning 18 years ago. What happened on 9/11 is fundamentally important, but equally important is the way the 9/11 cover-up signifies an absence of democratic, transparent, and accountable government. Establishing the truth is, in part, about restoring honesty and trust and confidence in the American political system. That is why, on July 24th of this year, the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District voted unanimously to adopt a legal resolution of support for the special federal grand jury investigation before the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The almost 3,000 innocent people who were murdered right before our eyes that day cannot speak, so it is left up to us to speak for them and demand that their voices be heard in a court of law with subpoena power and an impartial jury to consider all of the evidence by placing 9/11 under a microscope and investigating everything and anything down to the smallest of details, with the same veracity as the recent Mueller investigation into Russian collusion, and not before a commission of political appointees who had the rules dictated to them by some of the very people who were being investigated, or who had conflicts of interests, and which should have led to several members of the commission to recuse themselves. I demand to know, as should everyone, especially the media, why important testimony made that day from over 150 police, firefighters, and first responders regarding explosions wasn't included in the commission report, nor investigated further. Why didn't the FBI or NIST examine the wreckage for explosives? Why wasn't Ground Zero considered a crime scene and sealed off and processed accordingly? Why was crucial evidence of melted structural steel suppressed and not even considered, or worse yet, allowed to be carted off and destroyed? Why won't, after 18 years, mainstream media such as ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or Fox News, and if Fox News here, I take that back and I apologize, report on any of this, let alone ask the hard questions of how and why certain things occurred the way they did, especially in the collapse of the third World Trade Center building, building number 7, that most people don't even know about. And finally, why can't Americans hear about FDNY Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer, who succeeded in making it to the point of impact on the 78th floor of the South Tower with his men, and reported that he had 2 isolated pockets of fire and that we should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. So he made it up to the fire floor, and he saw what was going on. And contradicting the official storyline that it was a raging fire up there, here's a brave fireman who made it onto the fire floor and was doing his job. 1 minute after the final transmission, the South Tower collapsed. Why can't Americans hear about that it took a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act by the New York Times to get the fire department tapes released so that the public could hear exactly what the firefighters said? This occurring in August of 2005, almost exactly a year after 9/11 Commission had disbanded. That is not justice. Being in Washington today, I'll put a perspective on in terms of the cost of the 9/11 investigation and money spent on other government investigations. The Mueller investigation cost about $25 million. The Whitewater investigation cost about $60 to $70 million. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster cost about $175 million and 7 astronauts killed. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster cost about $400 million and 7 astronauts killed. 9/11 Commission was initially given $3 million and a deadline of 18 months to complete, with a final cost of about $15 million, and the Commission's conclusion was that it was a failure of imagination that led to 9/11 happening. Imagine that. The worst act of terrorism in the history of our country, which claimed almost 3,000 innocent lives and which dramatically altered the course of our nation and the world, and it had an imposed deadline and of just 18 months, which was extended by 2 months, and it had an initial budget of just $3 million. Remember what the chairman and vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission said. They were set up to fail, and they were starved of funds to do a proper investigation. Who could have imagined that, given the magnitude of such an atrocity? So it would seem, until now, that we have left unmolested those who set fire to the house and prosecuted those who sounded the alarm. But that is changing. People lie, but the facts don't. All the American people want now, after 18 years, is the truth based on the facts and the remaining forensic evidence and what can be proved in a court of law. That is why we are here today. 343 firefighters
including 3 of my good friends, Thomas Hetzel, Bobby Evans, and Mike Kiefer, perished that day. And these were some of the best and the bravest people in the world. And they, along with the rest of those who were murdered and died horrible deaths, deserve justice. At this time, I'd like to introduce Bob McIlvaine, father of Bobby McIlvaine, who was killed by an explosion in the lobby of the North Tower. Mr. McIlvaine.
Good job. If I get emotional, just ignore me. Anyway, so I didn't want to prepare anything because maybe I can just ad lib. I have a lot to say. I've been doing this for day one. Day one after Bobby died, I didn't believe the story. I just never did. So I've been on this search. I feel I have closure in my inner self because I know what happened. And obviously, I don't have the time to go into who did it. My main concern in life now is why was it done? And I always say you really, truly, truly have to understand history to understand what happened on 9/11. And you have to follow history. I've gone back I've spent more time on World War I than anything. Why in the world do we have such a disaster? World War II, 50s, the 60s, Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra is a big thing. To me, I link that with 9/11, but I really won't get into that. So, I've been doing it forever. On 9/11, Bobby, I'm convinced, I know for sure that he died before the towers were hit. So I say 9:40, I don't know exactly what it was, 9:46. Just because we took him home, 2 days after 9/11, and we buried him the following week. He was found immediately. We took him, he was in the morgue before the buildings came down. But so I've spent all this time, what happened to him? And again, I didn't believe his story. So we're talking about demolitions. We're talking about, what happened to the buildings. And of course, the official story is plane hit the, I'm just speaking of the North Tower. And because of Richard Gage, over the years, I've had a very difficult time with 9/11 family members because the biggest problem with 9/11, people talking about, is who did it. And it just goes from one person to another, to this, to that. Did Bush do it? Did Cheney do it? The secret state, the secret team, it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's very important. But mine is that these buildings were purposely demolished. I think even thinking about the planes, take that out of your mind. These buildings were blown up. The idea was to blow up the buildings. Planes had nothing to do with it. That was for show. And I don't want to diminish what happened to the people who died because of the planes. But that was all for show. So get that out of your mind. And you have to do your research. Why was this done? But getting back to the buildings, the 9/11 Commission. Now, I made 99.9% of the commission hearings, and it was a joke. And at first, I was trying to be very attentive. And I think it was after Condoleezza Rice. And I wish I could have punched her in the mouth. I was so upset. That's when I said, I was working with 9/11 Family for Peaceful Mars. I went to Japan. I was a real anti-war activist. After listening to Condoleezza Rice, I said, I'm devoting my life to this, finding out what happened, who murdered my son, Bobby. She stood up there and filibustered her way through the commission hearing. So after that, I had interviews, and I lost my temper to everyone I spoke to. So since then, I have an awful temper about that. I can't deal with 9/11 family members because they don't want to hear what I have to say, and I don't blame them. But I don't like being up at Ground Zero today. My son's up there now, but I can't stand it because a couple of years ago, someone started screaming at me that I would say such a thing that Muslims, I would tell her, Muslims had nothing to do with Bobby's death. Bobby died before the planes hit. So how can I say Muslims had anything to do with my death? And how many millions and millions and millions and millions of people have died in the Middle East because of this? Now, getting back to the commission report, this is what the commission had to say about the building coming down. I won't spend that much time. A jet fuel fireball erupted upon impact and shot down at least one bank of elevators. The fireball exploded onto numerous lower floors, including the 77th and 22nd, West Street lobby levels, and the B4 level, 4 stories below. Well, that's the biggest crock you've ever heard in your life. They spent maybe 30 seconds making that up. They did no investigation. So that's, my son was murdered. They spent no time investigating what happened in those buildings. Zero. They didn't talk about the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th, where the FBI had investigations going there that no one knew about. Why were those floors were demolished before the planes were hit? Why is that? That was even on Peter Jennings' show. 60 Minutes did a show on that. And what do we? No one hears this. Of course, that's shut down. No one talks about it. The press don't talk about it. Doesn't talk about it. So it's just, people have to do their homework. They have to believe. And again, that's where, going back to history, why would they blow up the buildings? Well, there's a lot of research that goes into it. I don't have the time to talk about that. But it was that was the crime, blowing up the buildings. And I really don't care what country, what people were involved in it. It's an international event. It's the Western Empire. That's what they do. That's what they do best. Human lives don't matter. So it really helped me. I don't have to get in arguments anymore. Richard came up doing what he's doing. I don't know when he came up, but what, 2005? Six. It made it easy for me. Because now I just say, Bobby was killed by an explosion. Bobby died before the planes hit. So we got a big time problem. Who blew up these damn buildings? But people keep coming up with their own theories, and that's what's killing the thing, the whole movement, I think. But Richard makes it very easy for me. You know, Building 7, it's obvious. That's a controlled demolition. So that's why I stick to that story. Bobby was murdered. And I'll gladly, if I'm in a bar with someone, if they really want to talk about it, I'll talk. I don't go to bars anymore, but I'll gladly talk to them. And it would, I think I don't have to teach a college course because you really do have to understand history, that this is what empires do. So I'm not blaming it on the United States. I'm not blaming it on Israel. Hey, they're all part of it. And you can figure out why. And to me, it was a financial crime, but we can get to, there were so many other reasons, oil, so forth and so on. But I'm happy with it. I feel good about it. And again, architects and engineers has made it so easy for me because I don't have to go into all those realms. Bobby was murdered, and the most important thing for me to say, Muslims had nothing, zero, to do with Bobby's murder, period. Okay.
Thank you, Bob. I'd like to call up Richard Gage, AIA architect and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Thank you. I represent 3,000 architects and engineers across the country and around the world who are demanding a new investigation. If 3,000 architects and engineers signed a statement to you saying that your house was in danger of collapse, would you listen to them? That's 25,000 years of technical credibility. Why did they sign the petition calling for a new investigation? Over the last 12 years, we've been assembling the evidence that's been provided from official sources, like the U.S. Geological Survey, who documents molten iron microspheres in all the World Trade Center dust. Where did they come from? How did they get to be molten? Extreme temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees is what's required for that phenomena, and the pools of molten iron, including pouring out of the South Tower minutes prior to its collapse. Why does a team of scientists find nanothermite chips, red-gray chips in all the World Trade Center dust? Why did FEMA document in their May 2002 Building Performance Assessment Report, in their limited metallurgical examination of the steel, hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel with sulfur. Sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. The military uses it to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Why is this found throughout all the World Trade Center dust as well? Why did the towers come down in 12 seconds completely shattered from top to bottom? Why are there isolated explosive ejections emitted out of the towers 20, 40, 60 stories down below what we're told is a gravitational collapse? Why does that not look like a gravitational collapse, but an ejection, a geometry of fireworks with 4-ton and 8-ton structural steel sections ejected laterally at 80 miles an hour, landing 800 feet in every direction? Physicists clock this material, and it is not gravity that's at work here. We're talking about high-energy explosives and evidence of thermite and nanothermite in the towers. Why do 156 first responders talk about the evidence of explosions, being in explosions, hearing explosions, seeing explosions, flashes of light, seeing them, many of them, and most of that before the towers collapsed? Why is there a third tower that hardly any architects and engineers know about? I'm talking about the third worst structural failure in modern history. World Trade Center Building 7, part of the World Trade Center complex, wasn't hit by an airplane. After witnesses hear explosions, this building drops like a rock, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, into its own footprint in under 7 seconds, in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. And yet, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain this collapse to the American people, said 7 years later, when everybody forgot about it, those who knew about it, oh, normal office fires brought this building down. Well, wait, these are few, small, and scattered fires in this building, presumably caused when the North Tower next to it went down. Well, office fires have never brought down a skyscraper before 9/11. Ever. But controlled demolition has brought down dozens and dozens and dozens. And it looks exactly like that. So that should have been the first hypothesis examined by NIST. And yet, it was relegated to a set of frequently asked questions years later, very frequently asked. And they said, no, we didn't find evidence of explosive residue. And years later than that, they write in writing, admit in writing, we never looked for evidence of explosive residue. You can't find what you're not looking for. Well, there's a problem with Building 7. And the University of Alaska was made aware of this problem and finally convinced to take a deeper look at Building 7. And they said, well, gosh, we have fires bringing a building down for the first time ever at free fall acceleration, as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Maybe we should look at this because there's hundreds of similarly designed buildings in the country and around the world. That's what convinced Professor Leroy Halsey, chair of the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, to look at this. One of the top forensic structural engineers in the country. This study was released about 4 or 5 days ago. It's available on our website for you to download. And it's called A Structural Reevaluation of the Collapse of World Trade Center 7. It's a major university study that I highly recommend you download on our website, ae911truth.org. The science behind the study: to rule out scenarios that would not cause the collapse of Building 7, and to identify the types of failures that could have caused the collapse. The data is open. You can download the data and review it. It's not hidden in a black box like NIST's computer modeling data, because we submitted a Freedom of Information Act request saying we'd like to see the data because it's not classified. So they have to release it, but they have an out. What's the out? It might jeopardize public safety. How could it jeopardize public safety to withhold this data from the architects and engineers who are responsible with ensuring the public safety? So, this study is open to peer review, unlike the NIST report. So they simulated the local structural responses to fire loading on floor 13, because that's where NIST focused its initiation of collapse theory for Building 7. They examined NIST's collapse initiation hypothesis, and they simulated numerous failure scenarios that would lead to the collapse of Building 7. What they found is a series of manipulations and assumptions that are invalid and I would call fraudulent, including making the exterior wall of the building infinitely stiff so that it would force the movement, the thermal movement of the slab under fire loading conditions away from the wall, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column 79, and then it falls, and in their scenario causes a cascading collapse because 9 floors have failed, and then that leaves column 79 unbraced, so it buckles. And that causes the complete failure all the way up to the east penthouse in less than 10 seconds. And then in another 10 seconds, this failure works its way across this football field-sized building. And then we see the collapse that you can see on YouTube just by Googling Building 7 collapse. Uniformly symmetrical free fall acceleration for a third of its 7-second fall. What else did they find? They found that NIST omitted key structural components, such as omitting the side plates on the side of column 79, which would have trapped the girder, keeping it from falling off of its seat. They omitted the stiffeners that would have stiffened the flanges under that girder, keeping them from folding up, because NIST says it only had to be pushed halfway off of its seat, and then the flange folded. So they conveniently omitted those stiffeners. So that flange could fold. So that girder could fall. But they also found that even if that girder fell, it only had a third of the weight and the impact load on the floor below, which would be required to break the girder below it, because there's 3 massive girders down there. They omitted the shear studs on the top of this girder, which would kept it from ever moving off of its seat. All this is in the shop drawings. So it's very obvious, beyond misinformation here, beyond this is deliberate. Now, the study doesn't make those points. He's very conservative, Professor Halsey. He, as a PhD, and his team of PhD researchers have concluded, based on their computer modeling, because they said, okay, NIST's assumptions are, most of them, invalid. Wow. Well, let's use them anyway and see what happens in our computer model, which, by the way, is generations ahead of what NIST used in their computer model 15 years ago. So they found that using those assumptions, there's no failure. There's no local failure, even using the missing components and the exterior wall infinitely stiff. They found that they had to take out 8 columns in that area in order for the building to fail. And then it tips. It doesn't come down uniformly. What do they have to do? Now we're at year 3.5 of this $300,000 study to get this building to collapse the way the video shows it. They had to remove not 8, not 10, not 100, but 650 columns over 8 floors within a second or so of each other. By God, then the building drops like a rock straight down uniformly, symmetrically, just like the videos show. So the conclusion is, this is not a progressive collapse. They failed. NIST. It's a global collapse initiated by the simultaneous failure of hundreds of columns all at once, virtually. This study pulls the rug out from the NIST study of the most important collapse in United States history, outside perhaps the Twin Towers. And it needs to be delivered to every university across the country and around the world, especially given how many similarly built buildings there are out there that are subject to free fall collapse after a few hours of randomly scattered fires. That's why we're here today. That's what we've introduced into the legal system, thanks to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, who's taken our evidence and this study to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to introduce the president and executive director and a former police officer with 23 years with the New Brunswick Police Department in New Jersey, the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, David Meiswinkle.
Thank you for being here. We can easily forgive a child who was afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. That was said 2,500 years ago by Plato. I applaud the media that's here. This reference isn't to those that aren't here, that have never been here. On 9/11, the most egregious act was perpetrated against the citizens of the United States of America. It had worldwide ramifications. In this country, there has never been a criminal investigation that resulted in a grand jury, at least to our knowledge, until the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry filed last April a petition, 54 pages, 57 exhibits, to the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York City. And we followed that up with an amended petition to add additional bombing charges. In November, we received from the U.S. Attorney, Jeffrey Berman, a letter acknowledging receipt of our grand jury petition and exhibits, saying that he read and reviewed and he would comply with the law regarding the submission. The law is 18 U.S.C. 3332A, which mandates him, I underline mandates him, to call a special grand jury to consider the evidence before him. That evidence, much of it, was gathered over many years by architects and engineers. The evidence is dispositive. In legal jargon, dispositive means no-brainer. It means all other possibilities have been eliminated, that when you look at this and analyze it, the only conclusion you can have, because all doubt has been removed, is that explosives, incendiaries, and controlled demolition were involved in bringing the towers down. Now, you heard Commissioner Joya talk about one of his colleagues, Oriel Palmer. These firemen, these valiant firemen, went up over 70 floors, risked their lives. They had another line or two to be brought up. They were next to the fire, above the fire, in the area of the fire, about to put it out. You can imagine what must have been going on with those perhaps responsible for this action, thinking, they put it out, what's the explanation to bring the towers down? They couldn't put it out, or wouldn't be allowed to put it out, because the official story, the official government story, is office fires brought the towers down, or office fires caused by jet fuel. And as Richard Gage told you, president of Architects and Engineers, Building 7, another giant skyscraper, the third one, was not hit by an airplane. There was no fuel involved from a jet airliner. But that came down for 100 feet, 8 floors or more, at free fall rate. Free fall means there's nothing under it. And as Richard Gage explained, nothing's under it. All the columns simultaneously being taken out, falling down in its footprint. There's only one conclusion. Now, we submitted this petition giving the U.S. Attorney this evidence, and we've waited for his reply, hoping that he's acting in good faith, because it seemed like he was. At least he gave us a letter. Now, when we received that letter, I'd like to say that we were invited into the castle, because for all these years, the truth has been out there, but it seemed like the official story was blocking the truth. And now the truth was going to be presented to a grand jury, which is 16 to 23 impartial folks, just like yourself, that can use your reason, logic, and common sense and look at what we present. And when you see it, you'll walk away and you'll say, explosions, bombs, controlled demolition, incendiaries. Now, you can grasp that if you go on the Lawyers Committee website, lc4911.org, lc4for911.org. And all the exhibits are listed there. The petitions listed there. We submitted to the U.S. Attorney people with material information that they should contact. And there's 2 versions, one for the grand jurors and one for the public, where, because of certain legal reasons, if we start mentioning particular names, that would not be smart for us, because we're just making suggestions to the U.S. Attorney. Now, we had not heard from them, so in July we called them, Mick Harrison, legal director of the Lawyers Committee, litigation director, and myself. We talked to Michael Ferreira, chief of terrorism, international narcotics in the Southern District. He was very respectful. He told us he could not disclose whether they are conducting a grand jury investigation at this time, because it's all secret. Well, we don't buy that, because we've done our homework and we see that they could give us some ministerial records and possibly substantive records. So on Friday, a few days ago, we sued. The Lawyers Committee has sued the U.S. Attorney, William Barr, and the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, Jeffrey Berman. Now, in March, we were down in Washington, and we filed another suit at that time. And that was a suit because the FBI had not followed a congressional a order, basically, to assess any information 9/11 related that was not originally considered by the 9/11 Commission. And we had 7 areas. The first area that they never assessed was the area that Richard Gage was talking about, the explosive evidence that exists. The FBI has never looked at it. The second area that we told them was reference to the high-fivers identified later as Israeli nationals that were seen and arrested in New Jersey for filming and congratulating apparently themselves or being happy about the event as it was happening. And the third count was the destruction of evidence because under a Freedom of Information Act, we asked the federal government for those photos, and they told us that they may have been destroyed in 2014 at about the same time Congress was ordering them to assess all available information related to 9/11. So we sued under the Open Public Records Act in New Jersey because the state police developed the film, and there was reports that there was explosive residue on the fabric in a blanket that they confiscated. That's on appeal right now. We've been able to get at least a log entry that we argue is reflective of those photos. Of course, the state in New Jersey says they're not, but the log entry says World Trade Center bombing, terrorism, confiscated film, and it's the same date that the photo transcript we have. We have an order, a FBI declassified piece of document that indicates the FBI received these photos from New Jersey State Police on September 13, 2001. We have a log entry referencing that, what we think it is, but so far it's been denied, all right? So that's some of the things that we're doing, the Lawyers Committee, and there's a lot of others, and I won't go into it, it'll take up too much time. But, yeah. So I'm going to sum it up right now. If you're interested in what I'm saying, lc4911.org. And I'll sum it up the way I started it. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Thank you for being here.